Let's look at the ITTOs. Let's start with the inputs. First, project management plan. There are 9 components of project management plan that are used as input during identify risk. Let's look at them one by one. Requirements management plan. Ambiguous, unclearly defined requirements indicate risks, obviously. Schedule management plan. The schedule management plan has details about activities and work packages that are ambiguous and uncertain, and also details the constraints and assumptions. This information helps to identify a risk in the relevant activities or work packages. Cost management plan. The cost management plan may identify areas that are subject to uncertainty or ambiguity. This plan details cost process and assumption that may indicate areas of uncertainty. Quality management plan. The quality management plan may help to identify areas with uncertainty or ambiguity, or the key assumptions might give a rise to risk. This will help identifying quality risks. The documented process can also help minimize threats and or enhance opportunities. Resource management plan. The resource management plan describes what resources are needed, identifies the resources available to the project, outlines assumptions related to resources, and explains how the resources will be managed. Knowing this information will help you to identify risks that are relevant to resources. Risk management process. The risk management plan provides information on risks that are related to roles and responsibilities, how risk management activities are included in the budget and schedule, and describes categories of risk which may be expressed as a risk breakdown structure. This information will be valuable in identifying the risk related to resources, cost, and schedule. Scope baseline. Scope baseline helps to understand the complexity of a project, which helps to understand the risk in the project. The project boundaries, acceptance criteria, constraints, and assumptions are some of the other factors help to identify risk. Schedule baseline. The schedule baseline contains project estimation that are uncertain or ambiguous. Those estimation may help to identify project risk. Imposed schedule constraints, dependencies between activities, and lack of clarity regarding milestone dates are estimates or indicators of risk. Cost baseline. The cost baseline will have inherited uncertainties, ambiguity, and assumptions. This will help to identify the risk and the project that are related to cost. The amount of contingency reserve allocated is another indicator to risk. Obviously, the higher the contingency reserve, the higher the activity at risk, and the project as a whole is at risk. Of course, budget constraints and lack of clarity regarding the funding requirements are also indicators of risk. The next one is project documents. There are 8 project documents that are used as input during identifying a risk. First one, assumption log. Assumptions and constraints are recorded in business case, project charter, may be the first-hand information to individual and project risk. Reviewing and analyzing the assumption log may help to identify new risk. Cost estimates. Cost estimation may be expressed as range, indicating degree of risk in the current estimate, including insufficient information, assumptions, and constraints. Duration estimates. Risk in duration estimates can be revealed by doing a structured review. Issue log. Issues recorded in the issue log may help to identify new risk in the project that may have influence on overall project risk. Issue log have the record of all the disagreement and confusions in the project. This helps to identify the new risk in the project. Lessons learned register. Use lessons learned database to review the risk. The identified risk in the earlier projects might reoccur in this project as well. This can help to reduce the risk of repeating the same mistake and take advantage of potential opportunities. Requirements documentation. Requirements documentation lists the project requirements and allow the team to identify those that could be at risk. Poorly defined requirements can be one of the source of risk, obviously. Resource requirements. The resource requirements ideally expressed as range, indicating the degree of risk. After reviewing the resource requirements, project manager can understand the risk due to insufficient quantity. Stakeholder register. Stakeholder register indicates who gets involved in identifying risk among those who can be risk owners. Agreements. When dealing with external parties outside the organization, there will be contract or agreement. The agreements may have information such as contract type, project deliverables, milestone dates, acceptance criteria, etc. It may also have details about the awards and penalties. These awards and penalties can present opportunities and threats. So, obviously, they become input. The next one is procurement documentation. First, overview. In order to understand procurement documents, it is important to understand the terms related to procurement. We already discussed that procurement is the purchase of goods and service from the supplier who is external to the organization. Typically, procurement cycle follows the steps shown in the diagram. Pay extra attention here because understanding this will help you to understand the next knowledge area, procurement management, a lot easier. The first is information gathering. Information about potential suppliers who can deliver the required product or service are gathered. Next, supplier contract. To compare and select the best seller depending on the service quotation or proposal is requested from the supplier. This can be done through advertisements or through direct contact with the supplier. The next step is negotiation. Negotiation is carried out about price, customization of the product or service to be delivered. With the selected seller, a contract is made to purchase the goods or service. Fulfillment. Based on the contract signed, the purchased goods or service are shipped and delivered. Additional training or installation of the product may also be provided. Lastly, closure. The delivered product or service is verified against the requirement. If they found satisfactory, then the contract is closed, payment is made. Documents involved in the procurement cycle are called procurement documents. Procurement documents are an integral part of the early stage of project initiation. Remember, procurement document documents the contractual relationship between buyer and the seller. Let's quickly rush through some of the procurement documents. RFP, RFI, RFQ offers contract amendments and or modifications. Anyway, we will have a detailed discussion about these in the upcoming procurement management knowledge area. For time being, just remember the name. Let's look at some of the other procurement documents. The contract schedule, scope, quality, and cost performance records, all drawings, plans, manuals, and other technical documents, all contract related to change documentation, payment records, and inspection results. All right, now look at how the procurement documents plays its role in current context. Isn't it a good idea to review all the initial procurement related documentation in first place, even before starting the procurement? It is, right? Because procuring service from outside the organization may increase the overall project risk. Those risks may introduce additional individual risk in other project constraints. By reviewing the procurement related documents, you get a clear-cut understanding of all the procurement related information, risk involved, and how they will impact the projects. For example, the procurement documentation will have information about seller's performance report, approved change request, inspection results, etc. Obviously, if there is a delay in delivering certain component, which is part of the outsource module, they will have impact on the overall project. The fifth input is enterprise environmental factors. Academic studies, benchmarking results, industry studies of similar projects, published material including commercial risk database or checklists, organizational risk appetite, tolerance, and thresholds. This helps you to identify the impact of a risk, rank risk, and these information will be helpful to determine which risk response strategies to use. So, these are some of the key enterprise environmental factors to be considered as inputs. The sixth and the final input is organizational process asserts. Checklists from previous similar projects, organizational and project process controls, project files including the actual data, risk statement formats, and risk from the past and similar projects are some of the useful things can be used from OPA. All right, let's talk about the tools and techniques. There are 6 in the list. Let's look at them. First, expert judgment. For this process, the experts will be from experts in risk identification, people who worked on previous similar projects. Data gathering. There are 3 in it. First, brainstorming. To identify a risk, brainstorming can be used to get creative ideas from the team members, subject matter experts, and stakeholders. Here, the goal is to obtain a comprehensive list of individual project risks and source of overall project risk. Approach by topic, such as risk breakdown structure, can be used as framework. Ensure that risk identified through brainstorming are clearly described since the technique can result in ideas that are not fully formed. Apart from risk breakdown structure, risk categories and prompt lists are also can be helpful to identify risk. Second, checklist. First, overview. A checklist is a comprehensive list of crucial tasks to be completed in specific order. This ensures no important steps is forgotten. Example, travel checklist. I hope you remember our earlier discussion. Often checklists are used as reminders. Now in context. Risk checklists are developed based on historical information from similar projects or checklists can be from the industries. Checklist may be quick and simple to use, but it's impossible to build an exhaustive one. Very importantly, it should not happen that people simply avoid a risk identification process in place of checklist. The project team should also explore the items that do not appear in the checklist. Additionally, the checklist should be reviewed from time to time to update new information as well as remove or archive obsolete informations. Third, interview. Individual project risks and resource of overall project risk can be identified by interviewing experienced project participants, stakeholders, and subject matter experts. Interviews should be conducted in an environment of trust and confidentiality to encourage honest and unbiased contribution. Data analysis. It's the fourth one in the list. Root cause analysis. Let's say you have a problem that the project might be delayed by 4 weeks. By exploring what caused this delay, you will be able to understand the root cause of this problem, which leads in identification of a risk. By categorizing the identified risk based on root cause, you can identify even more risk. With that, you can identify the root cause of those, and by addressing them, you can make sure it won't repeat in the future. Assumptions and constraints analysis. First, overview. What's an assumption? Something considered to be true without a proof, right? Example. Project funding will be available throughout the project. What is a constraint? Known limitations are called as constraints. Example, the project budget cannot go beyond $100,000. Every project management plan gets developed based on the set of assumptions and series of constraints. They often incorporated part of scope baseline and project estimates. Validating the assumptions and constraints determines the risks in the project. Inaccuracy, inconsistency, instability, or incompleteness in assumptions offered to find threats. Constraints may give opportunity by removing and relaxing the limiting factors. In context, validating the assumption may lead to identification of threat. Schedule constraints, budget limitation are examined to determine the level of threat. The next one is SWOT analysis. This technique examines the project from strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat SWOT perspectives. Strength and weakness are within oneself. It could be an individual, team, or organization. And opportunities and threats are from outside. The technique starts with the identification of strength and weakness of the organization, focusing on project, organization, and business area. This analysis also examines how far the threats can be overcome through strength and weakness of the organization that hinders the opportunities. Document analysis. It's also possible to identify certain risks by going through certain project documents. Let's look at some of those. Plans, assumptions, constraints, previous project file, contracts, agreements, and technical documentation. Uncertainty or ambiguity in project documents, as well as inconsistency within a document or between the documents, may be indicator of a risk on the project. Analysis of inclusion and exclusion can help to identify risk. It can be found in the project charter, contracts, and planning documentation. These can help identify further risk. Constraints such as schedule or budget limitations are examined to determine the level of risk they pose. Lessons learned, articles, and other sources can help to uncover risks. The next one in the list is facilitation, which is part of interpersonal and team skills. Facilitation is one of the effective techniques that is used to identify individual project risk and source of overall project risk. A skilled facilitator can help participants to remain focused on the risk identification task, follow the methods associated with the techniques accurately, ensure clear risk description, identify and overcome source of bias, and resolve any disagreements that may arise. The next one is prompt list. The prompt list is a predetermined list of risk categories. These are from the lowest level of risk breakdown structure. This list assists in identifying a risk. By looking at the list, the team will be prompted to think in the direction to identify risk. Let's look at some of the examples of prompt. PISTOL, meaning political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. TCOP, technical, environmental, commercial, operational, and political. VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The last one is meetings. To undertake a risk identification, the project team may conduct a specialized meeting, which is also called as a risk workshop. Brainstorming is the most often used method to identify a risk, but you can consider other methods depending on the need. On large project, it may be appropriate to invite the project sponsor, subject matter experts, sellers, representatives of customers, or other project stakeholders. Let's look at the outputs. First, risk register. The risk register captures details of identified project risk. The risk register may contain limited or extensive risk information depending on the project. The risk register may include list of risks stated as clearly as possible. Typically, they follow cause, risk, effect format. A potential risk owner is identified and recorded in risk register. There will be times when a response is identified at the same time as the risk. These potential responses should be added to the risk register as they are identified. They can be analyzed later as part of risk response planning. The root cause of risk provides valuable information which can be used later to plan risk responses. They are also helpful to reassess risks which are likely to reoccur. Qualitative risk analysis, plan risk response, implement risk response, and monitor risks are conducted throughout the project. So, the output of these risk process is updated in risk register. Documenting the lessons learned happen throughout the project, but it's best to share them immediately so that other projects within the organization can benefit from these lessons learned. Some of the additional informations may have a short risk title, risk category, current status of risk, one or more cause, one or more effects on objectives, risk triggers. By the way, triggers are nothing but the events or conditions that indicate that a risk is about to occur. WB is a reference of affected activities. Timing information. When was the risk identified? When might the risk occur? When might it no longer be relevant? And what is the deadline for taking action? Risk register will be constantly updated throughout the project. Don't forget, A risk register is a project document which is part of historical records that will be used in future projects. Let's move to the next one, risk report. Risk report presents information on source of overall project risk together with summary information on identified individual project risks. The risk report is developed progressively throughout the project risk management process. The result of perform qualitative risk analysis, perform quantitative risk analysis, plan risk response, implement risk response, and monitor risk are also included in the risk report as those processes get completed. A risk report may include source of overall project risk, identified threats and opportunities, summary information such as number of identified threats and opportunities, risk categories, metrics and trends, etc. The next one is project documents updates. There are 3 project documents that are updated. Assumption log. Identified risks may demand to update the existing assumptions, adding new assumptions. Issue log. The issue log should be updated to capture any new issues uncovered or changes in the currently logged issues. Lessons learned register. The lessons learned register can be updated with the information on techniques that were effective in identifying the risks. This will help to improve performance in later phases or in other projects. All right, that wraps up the ITTOs. Let's move to the next process.